pulled into the parking lot of the superstore on Baseline Road before my phone even stopped buzzing. My daughter had called 3 times in 4 minutes, which she never does. She knows I drive with the sound off. When I finally answered, she wasn't crying. That was the part that scared me most. She was just very, very quiet. "Mom," she said, "I'm at the parkade on Maravala. Can you come?" I didn't ask why. I already have my coat on. It was a Tuesday in February, which in Ottawa means the kind of cold that gets inside your boots before you've made it from the car to the front door. When I pulled into the parkade and saw her standing near the stairwell door with her winter coat open and the baby balanced on her hip, I didn't say a word. I just got out of the car, took the baby from her arms, clicked Hazel into the car seat I've kept in the back since she was born, and then I stood beside my daughter and waited. "He changed the locks," she said. "Okay." And his father called me into his office this morning and told me my position was being eliminated. I looked at her face. She had mascara dried under one eye. Her hair wasn't brushed properly, which she would have noticed if she weren't in shock. My daughter is meticulous. She checks her reflection in her phone screen before she walks into any room. The fact that she hadn't noticed told me everything I needed to know about how the last 8 hours had gone for her. "Get in the car, sweetheart," I said. "We'll figure it out." She looked at me like she was waiting for me to say something else. To react, maybe. To be upset. My daughter is 31 years old and she still hasn't entirely figured out that her mother does not perform emotions in parking garages. "Mom, did you hear what I said? He changed the locks." "I heard you. I held the passenger door open. Get in the car." I smiled at her across the roof of the car before I got back in. I couldn't help it. Not because I was happy. Nothing about watching my daughter stand in a February parkade with her baby and her work lanyard still around her neck made me happy. But I smiled because the moment she told me her father-in-law had fired her, something clicked into place inside me. A folder in my mind that I had kept organized and closed for almost 3 years suddenly felt very, very relevant. His father had no idea who actually owned the building his clinic sat in. That, I was almost certain, was going to matter. My daughter's name is Petra. I named her after my own grandmother, who was the sort of woman who wore good shoes to the grocery store and never let anyone see her sweat. I had hoped some of that would transfer. And in many ways, it had. Petra is smart, she's organized, she finished her RN degree in 3 years and went straight into a cardiology unit at the Civic. But she fell for a man named Scott when she was 27, and Scott came with a father who had spent the better part of a decade building a reputation in this city as a successful businessman. Medical clinics. 3 locations. A certain kind of confidence that reads as competence if you're not paying close attention. I had been paying close attention since the rehearsal dinner. Not because I disliked Scott. I didn't. Not at first. He was charming in the way that younger men who grow up watching their fathers command rooms can be charming. He smiled easily, and he picked up tabs, and he had a habit of saying absolutely to everything, which sounds reassuring right up until you notice he never actually follows through. But it was the father who made the small hairs on the back of my neck stand up. His name was Walter. Walter talked about his clinics the way some men talk about their children, with a kind of proprietary pride that didn't quite line up with the facts as I knew them. Because I knew the facts. I had worked in commercial property management for 22 years before I retired. I know what a lease looks like. I know who signs them and what it means when they do. And I knew, because I had looked into it quietly after the wedding, not to interfere, just to understand, that the 3 clinic locations Walter referred to as his were operating under commercial leases held by a numbered company. A numbered company that, when I traced it through the provincial registry, turned out to be majority-owned not by Walter, not by Scott, but by a property holding group whose silent partner had a very familiar name. My late husband's brother. Which made it, by inheritance and by the terms of a partnership agreement my brother-in-law had asked me to review 14 years ago, substantially mine. I hadn't done anything with that information. It wasn't my business yet, My daughter had married into this family, and I wasn't about to blow up her marriage over a lease structure she didn't even know existed. I had simply kept the file, updated it when the partnership transferred to me fully after my brother-in-law passed, made sure everything was in order, paid my property management accountant to keep the documentation clean. I drove home through the glebe, with the heat on high and Hazel making small contented sounds in the backseat, and my daughter staring out the window at the canal. The ice was still thick on the Rado. You could see a few people walking dogs out there, which always makes me nervous, even in February. He said it was a restructuring, Petra said eventually, that my role didn't exist anymore. Did he give you anything in writing? She reached into her coat pocket and handed me an envelope without looking at me. I tucked it into the cup holder to read later. And Scott? I asked. He texted me. He said he needed space to think and that I should stay with you for a while. She paused. The locks were already changed when I went home to get the baby's things. The super let me in to get the diaper bag. I didn't say anything for a moment. Where is the baby's car seat base? The other one, from your car. Still in Scott's car. We'll get another one tomorrow. She finally turned to look at me. Mum, are you not going to say anything about any of this? I'm going to say a great deal, I said, but not while I'm driving and not while I'm cold. Let me get Hazel settled and make tea, and then we'll talk. What I didn't tell her yet, what I held back not to be dramatic but because I needed to think before I spoke, was that the letter in the cup holder was going to be very interesting reading. Because if Walter had formally terminated Petra's employment, he had done it under the umbrella of the clinic's operating company, and the operating company's lease agreements all required written approval from the property holding group for any significant changes in personnel that affected the clinic's licensing. That was a clause I had insisted on 14 years ago, when my brother-in-law first asked me to look over the agreement. It had seemed like a small thing at the time. It wasn't a small thing anymore. That night, after Petra had fed Hazel and put her down in the travel crib I keep assembled in the second bedroom, and after we had sat at the kitchen table with tea and I had let her talk for an hour without interrupting, about Scott, about the way things had been shifting over the past 8 months, about the way Walter had treated her at the clinic like she was a temporary employee rather than a registered nurse with 3 years of cardiology experience, I told her to go to bed. You have questions, she said. Memmy, but they'll wait until morning? Mum. Sleep, Petra. I sat at the kitchen table until past midnight with my reading glasses on and my brother-in-law's original partnership documents in front of me. I had digitized everything after he passed, which my accountant had told me was smart and which I now understood was essential. I pulled up the provincial registry on my laptop and confirmed what I already knew. The numbered company had transferred cleanly to me. The leases on all 3 clinic locations, one in Kanata, one in Barhaven, one near the train yards, ran for another 4 years each. I called my property lawyer at 8 the next morning. Her name is Rowena. She's been my lawyer since I was 34 years old, and she has never once told me to calm down, which is the primary quality I look for in legal counsel. Tell me you're not calling about that Marival situation, she said. I need you to pull the clinic lease files and tell me exactly what Walter's operating company is and isn't permitted to do without written authorization from my holding company. There was a brief silence. Your daughter works there. My daughter was terminated yesterday. Another silence, longer this time. Give me until noon. Rowena called back at 11:40 with the information I expected. The lease agreements, which Walter had signed on behalf of his operating company and which he had apparently never read as carefully as he should have, contained several protective clauses that were now very relevant. Among them, any reduction in licensed clinical staff at a given location required 30 days written notice to the property holder. Any personnel changes affecting the clinic's billing status with the province required the property holder's written acknowledgement. And any lease termination initiated by the tenant required a full 90 days notice and a personal meeting with the property holder or their designate. Walter had done none of these things. More than that, when Rowena pulled the financing records as a courtesy, she found something I hadn't anticipated. Scott had applied for a line of credit against the Barhaven property 14 months ago. The application had used my holding company's registration number as collateral documentation, which was not only unauthorized, but constituted a misrepresentation on the application. I sat with that information for a full day before I decided what to do with it. I want to be clear about something. I was not angry in the way that people imagine a mother would be angry in that situation. I wasn't sitting in my kitchen plotting revenge. What I felt was something quieter and more specific than that. I felt the particular focus that comes from knowing exactly what has happened and exactly what you are permitted to do about it. It is a feeling I associate with the best moments of my professional life. The moments when a problem that looked like chaos turned out to have a very clean solution if you knew where to look. I told Petra on the third day. I sat her down at the kitchen table after Hazel's morning nap, and I walked her through everything, slowly, with the documents in front of her. She was very quiet while I talked. She asked almost no questions, which is unlike her. She picked up Hazel halfway through and held her the way she always does when she's processing something difficult, like the baby is an anchor. When I finished, she said, "He had no idea." No. Walter has been running those clinics for 9 years thinking he owned them. He owns the operating company. He does not own the property. He has never owned the property. He has been leasing it from a company that, since 2019, belongs to me. She was quiet again for a long moment. Hazel grabbed at her collar. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to request a meeting with both of them. I'm going to give them an opportunity to resolve this appropriately." I folded my hands on the table, and if they choose not to, Rowena has already drafted the notices. What notices? Lease violation notices. For the unauthorized personnel termination, for the credit application misrepresentation, and a formal demand for the 30 days notice period your termination did not receive, which means you are still technically employed until the proper notice period has been served, with pay. Petra stared at me. "Mum." "I know." "How long have you known about the leases?" "Since shortly after the wedding. I wasn't looking for anything. I like to understand the structures of things. It's a habit." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Scott texted me again last night. He said he thinks we should try mediation." "That's up to you." "He doesn't know." "No. He genuinely doesn't know that his father has been operating out of properties his mother-in-law owns." I wouldn't assume Scott knows much about the operational structure of anything his father runs. In my experience, men like Walter prefer to keep the details close. She was quiet again. Then softly, she almost laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh, but it wasn't a broken one either. "Okay," she said, "set up the meeting." I called Walter directly. I had his number from the wedding planning and had never had occasion to use it. He answered on the second ring with the cheerful confidence of a man who does not expect this call to be a problem. I told him I was calling in my capacity as the majority stakeholder of the numbered property holding company that held the leases on his 3 clinic locations. I told him I was aware of the recent personnel changes and the associated documentation irregularities. I told him I would like to meet at the earliest convenience to discuss the path forward. The silence on the other end of that phone call lasted a very long time. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Can you repeat that?" I repeated it, slower this time. He asked for the company registration number. I gave it to him. I gave him Rowena's name and told him she would be sending a formal meeting request within the hour. Then I said I hoped he had a good afternoon, and I ended the call. Rowena told me later that his lawyer called her within 20 minutes. The meeting took place the following Thursday at Rowena's office on Elgin Street. Walter came with his own lawyer, which I expected. Scott came too, which I hadn't expected and which made Petra's jaw tighten when she saw him across the table. He looked at her for a moment, and then he looked at his hands. He didn't look at me at all. Walter, to his credit, did not try to pretend he had known all along. He asked his lawyer questions in low, tense sentences. His lawyer answered in low, tense sentences. At some point, Walter looked at me directly and said, "You've had this the whole time." "Since 2019, yes." "And you never said anything." "It wasn't relevant until now." He looked at Petra. She held his gaze. She had brushed her hair that morning. She had worn the good blazer she saves for difficult days. I felt, looking at her across the table, something I don't entirely have words for. Pride, yes, but also something older. Recognition, maybe. The feeling of watching someone find the floor under their feet. The resolution wasn't dramatic. Walter's lawyer negotiated. Rowena negotiated back. The credit application misrepresentation was referred to the bank for review, which is not something we controlled, but was a consequence Walter had created for himself. Petra's termination was formally rescinded, replaced with a properly documented resignation effective 30 days from the meeting date, with full severance calculated at 2 weeks per year of service as required under Ontario employment standards, which, because the clinic operated in Ontario, applied even to the Ottawa location. She received 4 months severance, a letter of reference, and a formal written acknowledgement that her departure had been at the company's initiation, not hers. The credit application matter is still being reviewed. I won't speculate on how it resolves. Scott and Petra went to mediation. I did not ask how it went, and she did not tell me. What she told me, about 6 weeks after the meeting, is that she had found a position with a family medicine clinic in Westboro, a good clinic, with a GP she already knew from the Civic. She took Hazel to her first day of daycare at the Little Acorns place, 2 streets over from my house. She cried a little in my driveway before she drove away. I did not tell her not to cry. The lease on the Canada clinic comes up for renewal in 18 months. I have not yet decided whether to renew it. I keep a small wooden puzzle on the bookshelf in my front room, one of those ones shaped like a map of Canada. I bought it for Hazel for her first birthday, which she won't be old enough to use for another year or so. But sometimes when she's here for the afternoon and she pulls herself up on the shelf with both hands and reaches for it, I let her take it down and sit on the floor with the pieces. She doesn't know what it is yet. She just knows it's hers. That's enough for now. I've been thinking about what it actually takes for a person to hold their ground in a moment like that one. Not the dramatic version, not the version where someone makes a speech or slams a folder on a table. The quiet version. The version where you sit across from a man who spent 9 years treating your daughter like she was lucky to be in the room, and you don't raise your voice once. What Walter built, he built on a foundation he had never bothered to inspect. That's not bad luck. That's a choice, made slowly, over years. He chose to sign documents without reading them. He chose to assume that confidence and control were the same thing. He chose to treat my daughter as expendable the moment she became inconvenient. Every one of those choices had a consequence, and the consequences arrived on a Thursday afternoon in Rowena's office on Elgin Street. I'm not telling this story because I want credit for what happened. I'm telling it because I want Petra to understand something, and maybe someone else's daughter too, if they're listening. What protected her wasn't luck. It wasn't that I happened to be in the right place. It was that I had spent 22 years learning something carefully, and I had kept the paperwork, and I had paid attention when other people stopped paying attention. That kind of preparation is a form of integrity. It's what you do when no one is watching, and there's no immediate reason to bother. Walter never bothered. That difference between the person who does the work and the person who assumes it doesn't matter is exactly where the story turned. Petra has something her father-in-law never developed, and I say this not as her mother being partial, but as someone who has watched her move through difficulty. She thinks clearly when she's frightened. She asks the right questions before she reacts. When I sat her down at my kitchen table and walked her through every document, she didn't fall apart and she didn't immediately reach for her phone to call Scott. She sat with it. She held Hazel and she thought. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from practice, from being willing to sit with hard things long enough to understand them rather than just react to them. And then she said, set up the meeting, not because she was certain of the outcome, because she had decided to face it anyway. That's the part I keep coming back to, not the lease, not the clauses, not even the look on Walter's face when his lawyer confirmed what I had told him. It's the moment my daughter, who had been standing in a February parkade 6 days earlier with her coat open and her baby on her hip, sat across a boardroom table and held her own. She had been knocked flat. She got back up. She went to that meeting. She took the settlement. She enrolled Hazel in daycare. She found a new position. She kept going. I think that's what we owe the people who come after us. Not protection from every hard thing. That's not possible. And it wouldn't serve them if it were. What we owe them is the example of someone who paid attention, did the work, and didn't walk away when it mattered. The rest, they have to do themselves. Hazel will be 1 in March. She has no idea any of this happened. She just knows her grandmother's house smells like tea, and there's a wooden puzzle on the bottom shelf that she's allowed to take apart. That's a good place to start.